Let's create the magical winter sweater. All the front decor details you will be able to make from scraps and change them whenever you want. We will also embroider snowflakes which glows in the dark. And the best part is that to create the sweater you don't need an embroidery machine because we will do embroidery on our standard sewing machine. This video is created in partnership with Mettler, manufacturer of high-quality threads. This tutorial is divided in 3 major parts. In the first part, I'll show you how to take an old sweater and trace it to create a pattern for a new sweater. In second part, I'll show you how to turn your sewing machine into embroidery machine and create those glow-in-the-dark snowflakes. In the third final part, I'll show you how to take fabric scraps and turn them into decorative elements. Let's get started with part number 1, creating a pattern from an old sweater. I am making a sweater for my son, so I took a sweater that he already has and that fits him well. I take the sweater and I turn it wrong side out. Then I take a tissue paper, you can use any paper that you want, and I go ahead and I carefully trace around the front detail, around the back detail, around the sleeves. For the color, I do not trace the color, but I simply measure the top line of the color and I will be cutting a straight line of the fabric depending on this measurement. When sewing the color, I will simply stretch it so that it fits the neckline and it will neatly fall in shape. Now, when you traced around the back and the front details, I want you to take the detail and fold it in half. Using a ruler, you want to make sure that you create all lines straight and all lines are same distance. So you want to make sure that the shoulders are same length, the side is the same length, and also the curves are equally shaped. Once you have your front and back details ready, I want you to put them together at the shoulder line to make sure that the shoulders are equal length on both front and back details, and do the same with the side seams. For the sleeve detail, I want you to fold it in half and make sure that the long line right here is matching on both sides of the sleeve. When tracing around the pattern, I already included the side seam allowance, and now I only have to add the hem allowance at the bottom. After you added seam allowance, this is it, your sweater pattern is ready and you can start creating your sweater. Now let's move to part number 2, and we are turning our sewing machine into embroidery machine. First step that you need to do is to lower the feed jogs. Usually on sewing machines, there is a separate lever that allows you to do that. This means that the feed jogs are deactivated and they are under the metal plate and they won't be moving the fabric. We will be the ones who are moving the fabric. I also want you to go ahead and switch from standard sewing presser foot to free motion embroidery foot. This foot does not always press the fabric and it only lowers when the needle is piercing the fabric. This will give us again flexibility to move fabric in any direction that we want. When embroidering, I'm using spray adhesives. I'll show you this in the next step, but for embroidery with spray adhesives, you also want to install embroidery needle with anti-glue properties. This needle has special coating that protects it from the glue. We will also be using different threads than the ones that you use for sewing. In the bobbin, I will be using Mettler bobbinette thread, which is a perfect thread for bobbins when embroidering. This thread is very resistant, it doesn't tear away easily, and it's perfect for embroidery projects. I have used it in many projects and it's always my go-to thread when I need embroidery thread for bobbing. As the top thread, today I'm going to use Mettler Polyglow thread. Now this thread is really special because in the daylight, it looks just as regular sewing or embroidery thread, but once it gets dark, it starts to glow, giving it magical effect. I always keep a few bobbins of polyglow thread in my thread stash because it does add such a magical detail to any project, and it's really something that you can get very creative with. So now that we have prepared our sewing machine for embroidering, I want you to go ahead and prepare prepare the fabric. Now to do that, I partially assembled my sweater. I sewed together the shoulders, I installed the neckline, and I installed the sleeves. I kept the sides open because this will allow me to really touch every spot that I want with my embroidery details, because once the sides are sewn, they will be very difficult to reach. Now, if you have a hand embroidery hoop, that would be perfect. I thought I had it, turns out I didn't. So I will be doing this without the embroidery hoop, but just note that if you do have an embroidery hoop, you can use it as well. So first step, we need to back the backside of our fabric. From the interfacing, I am cutting out a piece that is slightly bigger than my embroidery detail. To do that, I like to use either a tear-away or cut-away interfacing. This interfacing does not have a glue on it, so it won't stick to the fabric. To make it stick to the fabric, you need spray adhesives. Spray adhesives on the interfacing and then stick it to the wrong side of the garment. Once interfacing is applied to the back of the fabric, it won't be stretching out and you will be able to create beautiful design without stretching out the fabric or ruining the entire embroidery look. The good part about the spray adhesive is that once you wash it out, it will go away, so it's only a temporary way to hold fabric and interfacing while you're doing your embroidery. Because we're doing embroidery on sweater fabric, which is knit fabric, and it's a little bit fuzzy, I'm also going to put on top a water-soluble film. And on that film, using a water-soluble marker, I drew my snowflake pattern, which will make it a bit easier for me to do my embroidery later. So I put interfacing on the wrong side of the garment and I put water-soluble film on the top of the garment. I will be doing several snowflakes, so I added interfacing and water-soluble film in all the different spots where I will do my embroidery. Now that you have prepared your fabric and your sewing machine, let's get started with the embroidering. On the sewing machine, make sure you're choosing the zigzag stitch. The width of the zigzag stitch depends on you, and the stitch length is not something you have to look at because the feed dogs are deactivated, they won't be moving the fabric, and we will be the ones that define the stitch length. So slip one of the snowflakes under the presser foot and start filling the lines using a zigzag stitch. Now, because the feed dogs are not moving the fabric, you have to slowly move the fabric yourself. And this is the tricky part because you want to keep always moving the fabric at the same super slow distance. Now, the good thing that because we're using free motion embroidery presser foot, you can move the fabric easily to any direction that you want. And if you missed a few stitches, don't forget that you can also move the fabric backwards when sewing. And for our snowflakes, you want to go ahead and fill in every single line using this free motion embroidery. Once I finish embroidering all the snowflakes, I'm removing as much water-soluble film as I can, and I'm also tearing away the tear-away interfacing. Now, because we use water-soluble film, because we use spray adhesives, I'm going to wash my sweater and just get rid of all that water-soluble material. Once the sweater is dried, I'm going to press the embroidery to make it flat and nice. I don't like to press the embroidery directly, so on top of the embroidery, I am putting an organza-like fabric, which is very sheer. I can see exactly where I need to embroider, and it's also heat resistant, so I can very smoothly iron it out. And this is it. We have embroidered the snowflakes that glow in the dark. Now let's move to creating those removable decorative elements. To do those details, I am going to use a felt fabric that I have available, but if you want, you can use any fabric scrap that you have and you can really get creative. If you're using any other fabric other than felt fabric, you want to go ahead and back the wrong side of the fabric with a fusible interfacing so that when we are doing embroidery stitching, the fabric does not not stretch out. So first I took a piece of paper and I created several different shapes that I wanted to create for my elements. Then I took my fabric and I cut 2 rectangles for each decorative element. Using water-soluble marker, I drew around each fabric detail. And I also marked inner details such as eyes and nose where I want to do extra embroidery stitches. If you want to add on top a bigger piece of different fabric, I took a piece of fabric and I stick it using a fabric glue. This glue is temporary solution that will hold that fabric in place. Now on your sewing machine, which is prepared for embroidering, we're going to first fill in all inner details only on the first layer of fabric. Now when you're doing embroidery, you want to use embroidery thread. My favorite is Mettler polishing thread, which comes in over 400 different colors and shades. Compared to standard sewing thread, the embroidery thread has this beautiful gloss, so whenever you're doing embroidering or decorative stitches, the embroidery thread will create a beautiful seam that has this subtle gloss. When I'm doing embroideries on my sewing machine or my embroidery machine, I usually use a lot of different colors, so I like to have Mettler polishing kit at home. This kit has tons of different colors, so whenever I need a different color, I usually can find it in this kit. So once you have threaded your sewing machine with embroidery thread, go ahead and first fill all the inside details on the one layer of fabric. So for me, I am creating the nose for the snowman, the eyes for the snowman, I'm creating the bubbles on the Christmas tree. Once you have embroidered all inside details for the first layer, you want to go ahead and slip the second layer of the fabric under the top layer. Then go ahead and using embroidery stitch, again the zigzag stitch is working as our embroidery stitch, you want to go ahead and go all around the perimeter of the detail. Once you went around that detail, I want you to leave a few centimeters for the opening. Now I'll be using this fluffy material, but again you can use fabric scraps, and you want to go ahead and through that opening stuff that figure to create a 3D effect. Once you have stuffed the figure, continue stitching and close that opening. Once you went all around the perimeter, I want you to go ahead and cut out your detail using embroidery scissors. Make sure not to damage the seam because it will start to fall apart, and I unfortunately know it firsthand because I did manage to damage my stitches in a few places and they started to fall apart. So learn from my mistakes and be very careful when cutting around the shape. Once you have all your details prepared, it's time for the final step, which is adding Velcro so that we can really create all those removable details. On my sweater, from the wrong side of the garment, I'm adding a small fusible interfacing piece, and on top of that piece and on top of the sweater, I'm going to add a piece of Velcro. The interfacing will stabilize the fabric, and when we are removing the garment, it will protect fabric from stretching out. Once the Velcro is installed on top of the sweater, I'm going to go ahead and sew around the Velcro to stabilize it in place. This is where I actually made a mistake when buying Velcro, because I bought Velcro with glue and it was impossible to sew around it properly. So when you're buying Velcro, make sure you're getting the one that doesn't have the glue, otherwise it will be nearly impossible to sew it using a sewing machine or even a hand needle. Once I installed the Velcro detail on my sweater, I finished assembling my sweater by sewing sides and hemming the sweater. And I also added a different piece of Velcro to every side of my removable decorative element. And this is it, this is finished. We have created our beautiful magical winter sweater. My son loved his new sweater and he loved playing with those decorative elements, which he thought are toys. And I had so much fun creating this project, and it allowed me to be very creative. If you create sweater using this tutorial, please send me a picture via Instagram. I would love to see your creation. Thank you for watching today, and I will see you next time. Bye!